Want to hit record? Andrew? Good. Okay. All right. Andrew?
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me? My video seems low. My computer might be moving a little slow, so
Yeah, I see your face. You're not moving, but
that's I'll try this one. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for your patience, everyone, and we're looking forward to a great webinar today. We only have an hour, so I'm going to move pretty quickly and do some quick introductions of the panel. As Kellyanne mentioned, my name is Andrew Dohrmann with TYLin. I'm really honored to moderate this discussion, and we are really fortunate to have a great panel of real experts in not only DC politics, but also transportation policy. You know most of them already. So while they have very long, illustrious biographies, I'm going to be pretty brief, and so we can get into what should be a good discussion. But also, I think the main outcome we're trying to get out of this conversation is to provide some helpful tidbits of information, intelligence, and guidance so that we as a community and the Commuter Rail Coalition can be as effective as possible going into the new Congress and a new administration. So of course, we have with us John Cline, who serves as Director of Government Relations and Affairs for the CRC. He is an institution in DC transit federal policy, having worked at USDOT in a number of positions over the years, as well as having served as Director of Commuter Rail for MBTA in Boston. So he knows our issues better than most, and we're fortunate to have him on our side. Next up, Julie Minerva is a partner with Carpi and Cline. I've had the pleasure of knowing Julie for over a decade, and she is extremely effective in DC. She's well loved on both sides of the aisle and at USDOT. She's an excellent advocate for her clients and knows transit and rail policy extremely well. So thanks for joining, Julie. And last but not least, another individual I had the pleasure of working with in DC, Auke Mahar-Piersma, who's been working with Cardinal infrastructure since 2023, but I'm sure many of you know him from having lobbied him for years when he worked on the House T&I committee as the master of transit and rail policy, and having a real impact on federal transit policy over the last, 20 years. So thank you, Auke. We're going to have a good discussion. I'll be providing some questions for the panel. But please don't hesitate to put in the chat box any questions that you want to see raised, and we'll get to them in the latter half of the panel. But to get the ball rolling, I thought we'd start off with a little bit of a lightning round to kind of stretch out the muscles and get the juices flowing with some easy topics. So the first question I'll ask for the panelists is, in this lightning round is, with the election results and big changes with the new administration, and Republicans taking complete control of Congress, what's one thing, and as you're advising your clients, what's one thing that you feel like you know, and what's one thing that you don't know, but you wish you had a clearer crystal ball to chart a path forward for the future. So what's one thing you know, and what's one thing that maybe none of us know right now? John?
Sure. I'll get going. I guess in the category of what we don't know, there's still quite a bit we don't know. So I think it's going to be particularly personnel issues. We know who the secretary is that's been nominated, but we really don't have a sense yet of how the modal administrations are going to be filled out, who the key players are going to be. So that's going to be of big interest, I think, in the coming weeks. And in the category of things that we do know that there is a clear mandate that the Trump administration feels that they have coming in, and that is to basically put everything on the table. It almost kind of gets back to the old concept of zero-based budgeting and starting from scratch and justifying your existence from the beginning. And even though there have been some starts and stops over the past decades to do similar things, I think that this is one of those opportunities. I think that there is going to be a real chance to argue, and of course, it's also potentially dangerous too, because things that you like are also up for review. But I think everybody can take away from what we've seen so far is that we're going to have to justify what we have, but we're also going to have an opportunity to argue for things that that we would like to have.
Sure. Couldn't agree more, John. Auke, what do you know?
You here? I think the big thing I know is, I guess there's two really. One is cost share for any grant program is going to nosedive, whether it be CAG or FRA programs. The lower the federal cost share, the more competitive your grant will be. And I think the other thing, this is especially unique to commuter railroads, is while the Trump administration has a generally poor relationship with labor unions, they have a strong relationship with rail labor. So I think that's a place for you all to think about when you're applying for grants or trying to get regulatory relief. Teaming up with rail labor, traditional rail labor, is probably a helpful thing in the Trump administration. Things I don't know. In the first Trump administration, the CAG program was constantly under attack. That being said, they moved 32 CAG grants. What we don't know is if with the new DOGE committee and focus on fiscal discipline, will CAG survive or not? I think you can make a case either direction. I think there's plenty of Republican support for the CAG program. I just don't know if there's enough support to keep it out of the DOGE committee or reconciliation, where they'll see pretty significant cuts in the budget.
Great. Thank you. That's great advice. Julie.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for that great introduction. Hey, everyone. So the one thing I do know is that we are going to have a lot of fire drills. This is an administration that likes to govern by social media, and when things happen, they happen quickly. So we're not going to have a lot of notice. When decisions get made, things will just happen. So I will be increasing my social media presence to track all of those players. So we do know that the governing style will be very, very different. But one thing we don't know, and something that I know is very important to everyone who joined today, is just how the Trump administration will treat grant awards from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's billions of dollars out there that's been awarded. Not everything's been obligated or under grant agreement. Do those things get clawed back? Do they get slowed down? What happens to all of that funding that has been awarded?
Yes, big a lot of questions and concerns around the country from those who've been successful at it in recent months and years. Thanks, Julie. And I'll keep picking on you, Julie, with a question too. If you can briefly set the table for the audience, and we have a good mix of public and private sector folks on the call. I think there's a wide range of there's a lot of rumors going around, and especially if you follow Twitter or Truth Social, you think you'll be bounding back and forth of and not knowing what's real. So maybe a little level setting for the audience, just as we look ahead to government funding, budget reconciliation, the continuation of grant programs, and how that ties in with reconciliation, and then expiration of IIJA, just to kind of give us the look ahead, so that we're all sort of speaking from the same frame of reference of what's in law and what's so that people don't have undue fears, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think the first rule of thumb is don't believe the headlines, or if you see a headline that catches your attention, read the whole article. Right? There's a lot of misleading information that is very salacious, and that's what makes the news. But oftentimes, if you look further than those headlines, you'll find that the truth is a little bit different. And that's why we're here in Washington, D.C. to walk the halls and really figure out what is fact and what is fiction. So with respect to laying the table or setting the table on what things actually look like, once Congress wraps up the end of the 118th Congress, they'll need to do another continuing resolution probably until the end of February, the end of March, but they'll all go home, right? They are going to really be looking at that Christmas holiday as a reason to get out of Washington, D.C. and back home to their families. But they won't be home for long because the 119th Congress will start on Friday, January the 3rd. That's the day that members are supposed to be sworn in. That's the day that all new members will have open houses. It's quite a fun day up on Capitol Hill if anyone wants to join. It's really the only day of the year that you can walk into almost any office without an appointment and talk to someone. But once they get through that and they elect a new speaker, they will move to ratifying the election results on Monday, January 6th. And then they've got 2 weeks of session before the inauguration. Just how much work they get done in those 2 weeks, I think, is questionable. I don't think they're going to get a lot done before Trump gets sworn in. And then once that happens, we are off to the races. The Senate will be spending a considerable amount of time reviewing Trump's nominees for various cabinet positions, including Sean Duffy for the Department of Transportation. We're going to see every committee get reorganized so that more senior members who want to move to new committees have the ability to do that. And then they have to make sure they've got places for all of the freshmen. Usually the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is one of the last to organize because it's such a large committee. And who doesn't like talking about infrastructure? It's a great place for a freshman member of Congress really to get their start. So that's what we're going to see in the first several weeks. But once we get to the end date of the continuing resolution, whether that's the end of February or the end of March, the next fiscal year will really kick off. That means everything from congressionally directed spending requests to the president's budget proposal to Congress, which I think probably won't come out until April or May. It will certainly be delayed. But in the background of all of that, we do know that the authorizing committees are really thinking about the next surface transportation bill because the bipartisan infrastructure law expires in FY26. And it usually takes Congress 2 years to ramp up to get ready for the next reauthorization. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to go seamlessly from the bipartisan infrastructure law until the next reauthorization bill, but they will spend a lot of time and effort collecting ideas. And once those ideas go onto paper, they sort of set the stage for what the bill is going to look like. So you need to get out there very, very early. So Andrew, I think with all of that, that probably takes us through to the first few months of the year and probably into the May, June timeframe. So I will stop there.
No, that's great. And we're going to put a pin in the conversation about how we, as a community, down a good marker, with priorities. Because you're right. Well, I would be very surprised if the next Congress is the Congress that enacts into law the future of IIJA. The direction they'll be set will remain in some form based on the direction they go. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned earlier in your opening remarks about grant awards, and let's talk about some of those near-term areas. And I think a lot of folks are seeing the election results in our world and thinking about areas of concern. What are the near-term things to be on guard about, but also what are those near-term opportunities? So to that point about, we have a lot of agencies on the call. Folks work for private consultants who work for a wide range of transportation agencies who have been recipient of grants over the last since the bill was passed. What are others hearing? What are you thinking about? And what can we and they be doing to help solidify those grant awards? They're not obligated. What are you hearing about which program, some of those discretionary programs that may be most targeted by either the administration, either through Cline back funds or through perhaps budget reconciliation later this year? Auke, do you have put you on the spot on that one?
Sure. It somewhat depends on the funding source. So if you have a grant award for something that's advanced appropriated out of IIJA, that money's probably safe. Only in that, well, it's safe from reconciliation, we think. And it's if it's obligated, it's probably safe. If it's unobligated, they could go after it. It would probably take an effort of the Trump administration refusing to obligate, and then Congress coming in afterwards and grabbing that money and pulling it back. It's possible they do that for some grant programs. My guess would be the low-no bus and bus facility grant program might be a target. Although a lot of that money is advanced appropriated. I think the most important thing everyone can do is obligate the money, get a grant agreement with FTA. There's not much time left to do that by administration, but if you can, get it done, even if it's not perfect, because you can always amend those in the future. And then I think the next most important thing to do is prepare a strong defense for these funding streams and get them off the target lists of reconciliation and DOGE and all those other people, the appropriators, whoever's looking at budget cuts. So that's a combination of de-emphasizing things that irritate Republicans, that's climate change, Justice 40 issues, those types of things. And showing that a lot of this money is going to red states. A good example is the CAG program is conventionally thought of as a left coast, east coast program for the big cities. The truth is nowadays it's funding lots of major projects in the middle of the country too, including very red states. And that's something that we need as an industry to continue to talk about to the Trump administration and the Republican Congress that these programs are really making a big impact in their states.
Great, thank you. John, what's your advice, or what are you hearing about where the bullseye, where the targets are, and what the treatment of some of these discretionary funding that's been awarded?
Yeah, I think Auke has made some very good points. You hear in our voices some caution in terms of being very bold in recommendations, just because unlike a lot of other transitions to a new administration, this one seems to be potentially, quite that there could be significant changes coming. But it's easier said than done. As Auke pointed out, there are a lot of red states, red districts that benefit from numerous programs. Take Amtrak, for example, which is the perennial target of lots of Republicans. And to speak to them today, there are a number of them would tell you, oh, we're going to get that Amtrak money and strip it out of there. And they've got 2 or 3 vote margin in the House, and you got a number of Northeast Republicans. Some of them are new freshman members who feel that their constituents benefit from something like the Amtrak program. So easier said than done in making those kind of cuts. That said, there's no doubt that I think particularly with the Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy effort to identify things in the government that at least are up for question, or maybe even making compelling arguments against them, it does argue that many of the discretionary programs at the DOT kind of sit out there, hang out there as potential targets. When you look at the fact that right now, as of I think today, there's just shy of $50 billion in unexpended balances in all of the DOT discretionary programs. So this is, the Fed-State partnership, the RAISE grants, CIG grants, CRISI grants. When you look at all of those discretionary grants, that's kind of a big fat target when you get a number that big. And of course, that does not include the monies that will be allocated presumably for FY26 as well. So it'll probably just add to that total. That's the sort of thing I think when you're doing a budget exercise the way DOGE is going to be undertaking, that it's going to stick out. And so I think it's beholden on everybody. If you've got those grants, certainly my recommendation would be to try to obligate those funds as soon as possible. Congress historically has tended not to mess with funds that have been obligated, but those that have not, I think, are open for potential rescissions along the way. And I think it's going to be, as Julie pointed out, it's going to kind of be a day-to-day issue. Normally, we all kind of get used to working in and around the federal government, a fairly orderly process. And now almost certainly we're going to move into budget reconciliation very quickly. And for those of you not familiar with budget reconciliation, it's just basically a tactic employed by Congress sometimes to first pass a budget resolution and then adjust programs and program funding to fit that resolution. And so there's going to be potentially some cuts and some redirecting of money, and programs are going to be adjusted accordingly. So there's going to be an immediate undertaking under reconciliation, and probably we'll see 2 reconciliations. We'll see one this year and probably one next year. It's going to put a microscope on a lot of programs. I guess I would close by saying that the one thing that is the case is that at the Department of Transportation, there are some very big programs over there and big issues that have gotten a lot of attention from the incoming Trump administration. Certainly things at the Federal Aviation Administration, air traffic control management, Boeing related issues. And then over at NHTSA with the whole treatment of automobile emissions and electric vehicle policy, which the incoming Trump administration views as being leaning too much forward in the Biden administration, and so likely some changes there. Those are really significant economic decisions, and so DOT itself is going to be quite cluttered with a lot of issues. But nonetheless, we shouldn't feel like because there's bigger issues being tackled that we're somehow going to be safe or immune from the focus. We need to be able to justify the programs and funding levels that we have and why they need to go forward.
Great. Thank you, John. Julie, do you have any kind of closing thoughts or pearls of wisdom on sort of the existing funding and awards and what you're advising? I guess, and we've been talking a lot of the discretionary programs. There's also the big concern, CIG, projects that have been sort of committed funds with no FFGAs. And what do we saw the last Trump administration, the unprecedented became what they did in not signing FFGAs. So do you think you can just be prepared for anything, or what should we be on the lookout for?
So since we know that transit will likely be a target, there's a lot we can be doing right now. First, with respect to the unobligated grants or something that got an award and hasn't been fully locked in yet, this is the time to be asking for help. Members of Congress are weighing in with DOT on a daily basis to make sure that the funding that they got for their districts will actually be delivered. So don't delay if you think you have an issue. I've had numerous conversations with multiple congressional delegations about those things. So get those calls in now before the holidays, because we have very little time between now and January 20th. But with respect to FTA and CIG in general, I would just really be taking some time to take a look at what all the libertarian think tanks are saying about transit. Look at Cato, look at Heritage, look at Hoover. That sort of builds the case of how we are going to need to defend transit in the next administration. And already we know that talking about quality of life and options and all those great things that transit brings is not going to move the needle for the Trump administration. We need to be focused on return on investment. We need to be talking about congestion, right? We need to talk about the development opportunities that have been created because of transit. I think if we spend a ton of time talking about other things, we're not going to get anywhere. So there's lots of material out there about what Heritage already thinks about transit. Use that as a guide to build your talking points and the case for your project by knowing what the other side is going to be saying. I think it's also worth noting, I've been spending a lot of time talking to people who had worked in the previous Trump administration, people who are trying to get ready for the next Trump administration. And one thing that was kind of interesting to me is somebody said that the president really didn't care about transit in the last administration. And if you look at all of the problems we had with administering the CIG pipeline, you would have thought that he hated it, right? But the fact of the matter is he didn't care, but he brought people into his administration who did care. And they cared to see more BRT. They cared to lower the federal share for projects. And so I think it's equally dangerous to have a president who doesn't care about transit. I think we need to figure out a way to get him to care, and you get him to care through the ROI and through congestion.
Yeah, great advice. Maybe that's a good transition to start thinking a little bit about the strategy side, and with what we know about who some of the incoming players will be, both within the administration and on Capitol Hill. And I couldn't agree more, because looking at who's been nominated to be Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, not an ideologue. But as you know better than me, there were some people very involved with Project 2025 who were jockeying for that position, or still jockeying for other senior positions at US DOT, who really developed and led some of those libertarian positions on with the federal interest in transit. So looking at the administration, DOT, then we have Doge. But as a reminder to everyone, Doge has no authority in law, and so it really comes down to the US DOT, and then what Congress tries to implement in those policies. So I'll let free for all anyone speak to maybe the incoming committee changes on Capitol Hill, and even if we don't know yet who some of those people will be, where do you see some of those kind of soft spots or pressure points where the CRC can start to and individual members can start to establish and put down markers on the importance of our projects and services?
I guess I'll kick off and just point out that you're going to have a fairly significant change in the Senate Commerce Committee. The likely incoming chairman is the newly reelected Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. And Cruz, as many of you know, has a fairly conservative agenda and record. I wouldn't say that his views on rail issues are well defined. He did not take a very active role, for example, in things like developing the Rail Safety Act that we saw come out of the Commerce Committee last year following the derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. He did step in at the committee level to try to object to provisions that were included in that bill. So, as the media depiction of him would tell you that he's not very bipartisan. That may be true. But I think that there's still potentially room there for some bipartisanship. Again, in the Senate, they've got 53 votes. They don't have 60 votes, so they're going to have to learn to get along if they hope to achieve the things that they want to achieve. And they can't do everything through reconciliation, where they only need a simple majority vote. So I think that's a noteworthy change. The other one that raises, I think, as many questions as well for our industry is Tim Scott assuming the chairmanship of the Senate Banking Committee. He's been the ranking member, has been generally kind of quiet on transit issues, although indicating some questions about the benefits and purpose of having a federal public transit program. So I think even though there are some projects of note in his state, I think there's definitely some work to be done there with Senator Scott.
All right. Auke, Julie?
I'll just add a few things. If Chairman Graves wins his reelection fight for House T&I, he's a very bipartisan member of Congress. Almost everything that moves to that committee is bipartisan, more so than I've seen in the past in quite a while. So I think that bodes well for us. That being said, reconciliation is always a partisan process, so don't expect that there. The other thing I would say, following up on John's comments, Ted Cruz's staff, his rail staff, are know rail very well, which is somewhat unique. So that's a good and bad thing. Mostly good because I think working with people who understand rail is beneficial in the long run. What else would I say? I think the fact that the House will remain so very close and narrow means they have to be, the Republicans have an absolute advantage to move big stuff. At the same time, they have to basically have all their members on board. And that's, in the rail world, as John said about Amtrak funding or transit funding in general, there's going to be a handful of suburban Republicans who are going to likely object to big cuts in transit funding. Our job to find them and make the case to them. But that's, I think, an important thing to remember.
With all of these changes, I mean, we're going to be meeting new people right and left, either in the administration, within the committee structures, or even in the personal offices for the congressional delegations that everybody here works with. I think it's really important that we be the first ones to tell our stories about our projects, because if you're not the first one, somebody else will be, and it may not be the right story. So continued education is always necessary. This time around, bring in your business community in a much more meaningful way than maybe you have the past 4 years. Figure out the big CEOs in your community that need transit to get people to the offices. Bring them with you to DC. Have them walk the halls with you. That will resonate a lot, especially with the members that Auke was talking about. That's a different audience. They're used to seeing mayors, they're used to seeing supervisors. All those elected officials are really great champions for transit, but we need to mix it up a little bit. And this is an administration that likes to hear from the business community.
For sure. All right, so along that line of thinking ahead to how we can be effective moving forward, and I agree with the sentiment. It's like some of the near medium term stuff is maybe playing the little defense. And then what are those areas where there could be rooms for on the longer term for offense plus defense as well. And I couldn't agree more with the bringing in the broad tent of suppliers and business and making the importance of transit investments. One of my observations from my time working on the Hill on the EPW committee and getting to know you all is the importance of industry groups, but it's not the name of the association. And I'll bring up AASHTO, for example, probably the most influential transportation public agency stakeholder group. They don't donate millions of dollars to members, and it's not them. They're powerful because of their membership, and the state DOT secretaries are viewed by senators and House members as one of the most trusted, the voice they go to. And when they hear from their state DOT secretary, they listen. And so that's why it's really incumbent upon the members of the CRC to help with strength in numbers, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. And so how important it is for members to hear directly from the agencies within their district, because the committees, authorizing committees, appropriations committees, leadership, they need to hear from members on these. And with those tight margins, as you've discussed, hopefully some of the worst case scenarios and fears that float around right now won't actually come to pass, because a couple sympathetic members in either chamber can prevent billions of dollars of funds being rescinded from some of these programs that we care so much about. So do you have any, as we're looking ahead to kind of that near term, probably budget reconciliation, and then making some progress on the CRC's priorities for reauthorization, what can we be doing differently, and what are the key things to focus on, key offices, key types of projects to emphasize so we can be successful in the new environment we're facing?
I guess I'll jump in initially and just say that obviously there's some changes in leadership on Capitol Hill. significant changes in leadership at the Department of Transportation. So we have our work cut out from us to get in front of people and talk about our industry, where it's going, what are some of the challenges that we face, what are some of the things that we think are problematic. For example, I point to the CRISI program, a program that commuter rail cannot avail itself of. And it's there for the benefit of intercity passenger and freight, and more than half that program going to short line railroads. And it's just, it seems like it's a misfire in terms of federal policy, that commuter rail is left out or doesn't have a similar program. We effectively do not have a discretionary program to fund infrastructure needs and rolling stock rehabilitation and replacement needs. And it's a huge need, and one that has forces a lot of our agencies to really come up with some creative ways to continue their operations. But this comes at a time where the pandemic dealt a significant blow to our ridership, and so we have to be prepared to explain to people where our industry, where our individual agencies are going. I think members of our coalition, at the end of the day, the thing that we get out of this, and when somebody asks what's the value that this coalition brings, it is bringing that message to the key policymakers, making sure that they understand it. And I think for years there was a lack of clear knowledge and understanding about how commuter rail was different from transit. It was just kind of rolled up together and thought of as being one, even amongst key committee staff on committees of jurisdiction. I think that they didn't have a lot of understanding of that. So I think we've done a lot over the past 5 years to break through and get that information out there. I think it's just the beginning. And it really requires not only our public sector, public agencies, but our private sector members too, to help us in that effort. I can't tell you how many times that we've done meetings on the Hill, and when we've had our private sector members along with us for these meetings, we might be talking about policy that directly impacts the agencies, but having the perspective of the private sector members, I think, has been incredibly valuable in the effort. So I really encourage everybody to get behind these things. You all are familiar with things like getting a CRISI program or solving our insurance issue, our excess liability insurance issue. These are issues that we've kicked around for a fair amount of time. But we have a whole new crew of people that we need to argue for our place and our piece of the pie at a time when there's serious reconsideration of everything, perhaps like we haven't seen. I mean, I think the last time I've seen a serious reconsideration of federal spending has been in the Reagan administration, and I think it's going to be at least that and then some this go around.
All that, I think, to some extent, we ought to rethink not our priorities, but how we message our priorities. So in the Biden administration, we talked about labor and Justice 40 and climate change. And now we need to talk about regulatory relief, and we need to talk about local control and things that they want to hear, and take the things that are important to the coalition and spin them in that direction. So a good example of that would be the insurance liability provisions we're dealing with right now. We can label that pretty easily like regulatory relief because they're expensive. And if anything we can do to lower that cost or just make it easier to buy insurance would be a good thing for the coalition, and something that, I think if you frame it right, something that Republicans would see as a pro-business and regulatory relief issue that they can support.
Good point. Julie, any strategy advice and how to advocacy effectiveness?
Be consistent, right? This isn't going to be one fly-in. This isn't going to be one group of meetings. There's an opportunity to make sure that CRC's talking points are with every member of the TNI committee before Sean Duffy comes up to testify and defend the president's budget, right? We need to make sure that we've got more people on that committee defending transit. Recently, Seth Moulton from Massachusetts has really taken that role on, and he's very eloquent in doing so. But we need more Seth Moultons out there, and we need to foster those by really walking the committee members on authorization and appropriations about why we matter. So if we do come under attack, other parts of the country can stand up for us. I'd also say, think back to the days of surface transportation reauthorization when Senator Shelby from Alabama really led the way, on these issues. And he did so because he had a lot of suppliers. It was important to his state. Right now, a lot of the power in the House is running through Louisiana. So as a coalition, what do we have to show in Louisiana? How do we exercise that and leverage those relationships that would be constituents of Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Scalise and other folks in Louisiana? So just a thought for all of you.
Yeah, great thoughts. In addition to the advocacy messaging, and John mentioned a couple of the priorities. How much do you think we need to, I'll say revisit, but in light of, be interested in hearing what you think the temperature is on Capitol Hill with the bill's funding levels. And the outside will say, well, that's overdue. This is what we should have been doing the last 30 years. While a lot of folks on Capitol Hill will say that was a once in a lifetime investment. Don't expect that to happen again. That's funding levels on top of, in addition to the uniqueness of doing advanced appropriations. So as we're walking back from September 30th, 2026, we have a highway trust fund that is wasn't anywhere near sustaining the level of funding prior to bill. So there'll be a massive shortfall to maintain even existing funding levels. But can you speak to what you think the mood will be on the key committees of what kind of what the baseline they're writing to is, and how much we need to think about what are those areas of to target of whether it's policy shifts within a program versus seeking more funding. I mean, I was still back working on MAP 21 when I was in the Senate, and we were reducing the number of federal highway programs from like 108 to 30, but people would come in and ask for new programs to be created. They're so tone deaf to the prevailing winds that they kind of got laughed out of the office. So what can we be thinking about that's sort of that we're all swimming, paddling in the same direction, but we're being pragmatic too, based on where the direction and the scope that things might be headed?
I think the first thing is we should not be asking for massive increases in funding. We should be asking for level funding, because if we get IIJ funding for another 5 years, that is a big victory. And so I think we can easily document that every one of those discretionary grant programs are oversubscribed by 10 to 1. That's pretty easy to show. So we can show we need the money. But just, ask for even getting level funding would feel like a reasonable ask and protect us from that issue you just raised where you get laughed out of an office. When I was in Capitol Hill, I definitely laughed people out of offices frequently. So yes, it's very important to have that correct ask. I think the other thing to think about is on the Highway Trust Fund, we're not going to solve that, right? The commuter rail coalition is not going to solve it. Honestly, there is no solution for it unless you're willing to raise gas taxes. You can do it in a fee electric vehicles. That'll close a tiny bit of the gap, but not really close it. It's, failed policy from Congress from the last 20, 25 years of not raising the gas tax. Not that I'm thinking they're going to do that. I know they're not. But I don't think we should be on the hook to solve that issue, because there is no reasonable political solution out there. And it's Congress's job to solve it. So we should ask for level funding, let them figure out how to pay for it. And um, and then the thing I think is focusing on is regulatory relief. What can we change in terms of policy changes? What can we change that'll help our members and their daily business, and call it regulatory relief? So are there FRA safety things that are just a step too far you need to deal with? Are there FTA rules from your funding that are really annoying? I know the answer to those questions is yes for both of them. Identifying some of those that will stand out to Republicans as overreach by the federal government, they will be excited to get those requests. NEPA is always a good one, just to be honest. If we can't go in and say fix NEPA, because that doesn't help them. We need to identify particular things they need to change to streamline our project approvals.
Good stuff. Julie.
Yeah, I just, from what Auke was saying, I completely agree. I just think it really matters that if you're going to ask for something, you need to be able to defend it. You can't simply ask for the same level of funding as BIL if we don't have something to show for it. And we know we have something to show for it in this industry. And so, Kellyanne, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness later, but I think this is a good opportunity to talk about ways to really marshal all of the might of the CRC and put together a white paper on return on investment, put together a white paper on congestion relief, put together a white paper on return to work, right? We have all of those things going for these projects and these communities, but we need them in one place that can be what we share with Capitol Hill. So, but I want to pivot a little bit because we haven't touched much on this one aspect that still is important in Washington. I know we have a trifecta of Republican control, but bipartisanship will still matter. There are still a lot of members that are looking for bipartisan causes. There are still a lot of Republicans that don't want to get painted with a MAGA brush. There's a lot of Democrats who are in Trump districts who need to find some Republican-leaning causes so that their constituents will continue to vote for them. So we really can thread that needle as an industry and move forward. And there's going to be some issues that are simply just not going to be bipartisan, but we should find the ones that are, start with those, and then keep checking through the list.
That's great advice. John, any of your thoughts on kind of shaping priorities to fit the new paradigm?
Yeah, it's to use your term, what are the prevailing winds? And I think Auke made some very good points. I agree with him that with reauthorization of the surface transportation programs just around the corner, we will be very lucky to maintain the funding levels that we saw in the IIJA. It's just putting aside policy differences that people may have. The reality is that the budget pressures are very real, and they're going to impact all programs across the board, everything that the federal government does. And the federal government is being called to do more in certain areas. So I think we have to make very focused arguments and very specific show. To Julie's point, we need to justify our reason for existing and receiving scarce resources from the federal government. And that doesn't involve going in and just talking about airy things. I think, Andrew, you had mentioned in a conversation people showing up and arguing for maintaining the Highway Trust Fund. It's kind of like going to Congress and saying that you support world peace. It's like, okay, great, thanks, but specifically, what do you need? So I think we really need to be very specific, and not get sucked into issues. As Auke pointed out, the Highway Trust Fund, for example, is problematic in terms of funding. I think so far we've, over the past few years, have supplemented around 80 billion plus in shortfall funding from the Highway Trust Fund for the surface program. So Congress has not dealt with that issue. They're not going to likely deal with it anytime soon, and that's not necessarily our problem. We really should stick to going after the things that matter. And I think something like environmental review processes is a classic example where I think we can find some support in the Trump administration. And during the first Trump administration, they had that as a key priority. I think one of the mistakes that the Biden administration made was walking back some of those reforms. I think the Trump administration will go right back at that. And I think they'll even try to argue in court to clip back some of the expansion of what these environmental reviews should include, and have contributed to the delays. So I think there's going to be some commonality on issues like that. But we do need to be prepared to justify the funding. For example, why do we need infrastructure fund? Why shouldn't we just receive a block grant? There's a lot of belief, I think, amongst some Trump people that let's just push out some block grants and get rid of all the discretionary programs. And we need to be able to explain why that doesn't necessarily work for us, and do so very clearly, and build support on Capitol Hill, and do it in a bipartisan fashion.
Yeah, you're here. All right, I'll pause for a second, just to remind the audience that if you have any questions you want to throw into the meeting chat. And Kellyanne, if you're seeing things and we're not, don't hesitate to chime in. But here's your chance to ask some experts anything you want, some free advice. So don't be shy, folks. A question I have, speaking of regulatory relief or regulatory impacts to the industry, what else might we expect from here? Really gets the, and I always like to think, what can the administration do and what's really up to Congress? But how about some of the, and just a reminder for the audience, how, I've heard questions from really savvy folks thinking that the Trump administration could just eliminate the RAISE program, for example, and just that reminder that, the programs and authorities in bill that is federal law through the end of fiscal year 2026. And, but there are areas like Buy America, for example, where the implementation of a policy and, the statute can really impact how it affects the real world. So, and that's the first thing that comes to mind. But, and a good question about tariffs here on the supply chain. Any thoughts about how you think the Trump administration might change or not how they're implementing some of those key policy aspects of IIJA, like Buy America, and then to tag on, how can we see tariffs? And my bet is we've never seen 25% tariffs on any of these countries in solid bluff. But if that, what could be some of those market impacts be to our world based on some of the Trump administration's rhetoric or past actions?
My guess is because of Buy America, tariff impacts on, purchasing rolling stock or other big projects is less than other industries. That being said, there will definitely be impacts. If depending on what the Trump administration targets to some extent, right? If it's steel or other things, those are, while we're using American steel and rolling stock products to meet Buy America, the price of American steel will rise too if there's a tariff placed on steel from other countries. So those tariffs will not, will raise prices for sure. I think 90% of the economists agree with that. I think the one good thing is that we won't be alone. It'll hurt other industries and hurt other industries a lot more because we have some relief in that from Buy America.
Good point. John, Julie, do you have any thoughts on?
Well, I think
Yeah,
we all Sorry, John. I think we've all lived through various cost increases on projects in the last 8 years anyways, right? So take a look at what those cost increases already are. And then if you apply tariffs to it, you know it will go through the roof. So being able to walk folks through how much more expensive projects already are and what they could be if we were to see a tariff implemented. The incoming president, he talks a big game, but you can't really bet on what he is being truthful about and what he's just saying, right? So we do need to keep that in mind in this conversation, and really just try to prevent unintended consequences here. If you can make the counter argument to him about how this really hurts American businesses, that's the way to go. But we're going to need to find somebody who can be the first and last person to talk to the president on this issue.
I guess I would add to that, one of the issues that really sticks out that certainly has an impact on us is energy. I think the administration has a different approach on energy, and particularly as it relates to clean air goals and emissions. Sorry about that. I think things like our low-no program for buses that transit benefits from. I think that, that's the sort of thing you can likely see the Trump administration going after. It is written in law, and they would have a hard time at this point cutting back on funding there. But clearly, when you look at it from the automobile side, they're clearly going to redirect things away from electric vehicles, or at least the mandates that we're moving things toward electric vehicles. And I think that's going to have a big impact on our industry. We have to decide, do we continue to plow forward with some of our initiatives? And then and back to the issue on tariffs, can we get that technology? Can we get the resources that we need, whatever pathway we choose? I think we have the benefit here of being able to ride on the coattails of the highway industry. The highway industry has been impacted quite dramatically by resource constraints and tariffs on things, and also the challenges of meeting Buy America. So I think that that particularly the Buy America piece of it is something that we need to communicate more clearly to the Hill. And if ultimately the plan is, and I think Congress's intent is quite clear, and certainly the Trump administration is quite clear that their intent is to reshore as much manufacturing as possible, whether it makes economic sense or not, and we will all end up paying for that somehow. But so I don't see them backing off necessarily, but to the extent that there are phase-in periods and the ability to adjust things when those shortages are identified, I think is key. And you see a lot of this going on in the automobile and aircraft manufacturing world, with policies affecting those industries. They're really going to have to step back from some of the initial goals, and that's only done when you really can justify those arguments.
Points, John. Thank you. Thanks, Julie and Auke. I think we're getting close to it. We're almost out of time. I think my biggest takeaways, and I hope to impress upon the audience, there's a lot of uncertainty ahead, and there might be challenges, but we're not going off a cliff next month. The world is not going to end, and a lot of things will continue as is. And it just reinforces the importance of being, as Julie mentioned, being consistent, being proactive with your members. And I couldn't emphasize that more from having worked for House and Senate members. If you don't want to be only reaching out to your elected member of Congress when you're asking for something, you're doing yourself a disservice. So especially if you have a new member of Congress, please go out of your way to get them educated, and obviously, ideally, a champion for what you're doing, so that they're that more excited to go to the mat for you. But don't sit back and wait for something to fall off the tracks. Any last words, panel, or just we'll give you a virtual rep. Thanks for participating.
Well, thanks, Julie, Auke, John, and of course, Andrew for moderating today. I found it very informational. For anyone who came late, I said at the top that this event is being recorded, so it will be posted on the CRC's website for future reference. And we've got our work cut out for us. So thank you all for your insights and have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.